Welcome to this 20-minute video concerning the notices of rectification issued to 3 primary or lead councils in the South West, that is Devon County, Cornwall and Torbay Councils, regarding their approach to emergency planning and management. Our objective as 7 concerned citizens is to avert a regional catastrophe relating to this issue and in part the declared climate crisis. In this presentation, we will highlight some key findings from our Freedom of Information inquiry, explain the notices with suggested rectification measures, express some of our key concerns, and raise considerations about due diligence, scrutiny, and assurance. In 2019, these leading councils declared a climate emergency, taking special powers and mandating aggressive net zero targets. Through a series of Freedom of Information requests, we have identified serious failures and deficiencies institutionally across these organisations. These include failures and deficiencies in advisory, bias and predetermination, strategy and planning approaches, organisation systems, audit and governance. Of great concern, after 5 years, these issues have not been spotted, addressed and then corrected by either advisory, audit or governance systems. This demonstrates a significant and ongoing failure of organisation, which poses a serious and immediate threat to the health and well-being of this region and its people. A threat from strategy and policy being created and executed by organisations that have not been designed and developed for such purposes. Bringing these issues to the attention of the executive and leadership teams of these 3 councils have raised greater concerns relating to leadership hubris and the avoidance of responsibility, a lack of organisation maturity to deal openly and effectively with strategic risk warnings, strategic reappraisals, and dynamic critical feedback, which are characteristics of mature emergency planning type organisations. Also, a lack of organisational awareness of how to engage appropriately with the gravity and nature of the issues being notified. Such responses are heightened indicators that the current organisation is not fit for the purpose of complex, systemic emergency planning and management. On our website, you can find a 56-page report with rectification suggestions that have been issued to all 3 councils, informed by our Freedom of Information inquiry. Included is a response by Clintel, an independent climate policy watchdog specifically relating to the Cornwall and Devon climate adaptation consultation and regional proposals. There are 2 videos explaining the report and notice letters. You can find the notice letters and subsequent correspondence. There is also supporting information such as videos, interviews, website links, and what other citizens are saying to their councils and councillors across the UK. Within this presentation, we have 3 examples to share that highlight some of our concerns and offer some insight into our findings. Our first example relates to risk and value management, where the highest risk ranking of 25 is given to an almost certain 70 centimetre raise in sea levels by 2050. Actually, the most likely scenario is 2.5 centimetre rise, which is 1 inch, with little or no effects on infrastructure. This gives a combined risk score of 5 or less, not 25 as given. This gross over-exaggeration and high risk ranking has implications associated with strategic and executive priorities and attention, funding and budgets. This example highlights very questionable judgment by the assessing officers, a failure of scrutiny, and a deficiency in the risk management system that had recently been upgraded, supplemented by training and advisory guidance. This example demonstrates an organisational inability to intelligently discern what constitutes emergency prioritisation, funding and attention. This was not an isolated example, as similar issues were evident, repeated across the region. Through this example, we highlight an urgent and immediate need for enhanced scrutiny and reappraisals of the risk and value management systems. Example 2 relates to bias, predetermination and advisory failures. Under the Freedom of Information, we asked about the defining advice informing the decision to declare a climate emergency and net zero as the solution. It was reported that the decision was made solely on the advice from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and its special report published in November 2018. These are the headline issues which are founded upon a hypothesis of human-made global warming by greenhouse gases such as CO2. So only one scientific worldview and source of information has been considered, with a dominating solution set of urgent CO2 reduction. For over 2 decades, this position and science has been strongly contested by a large independent scientific community who advocate a greater emphasis on natural cycles and dynamics driving warming and climate change. Organisations such as Clintel, an independent climate watchdog with almost 2,000 signatures advocating no climate emergency and warning sternly against net zero policy. They highlight criticisms against the IPCC, such as manufactured consensus, cherry-picking data to promote a certain narrative, scientific bias and exclusion, for example ignoring the benefits from mild warming, such as increased plant growth and less energy usage, and over-exaggerating and alarm. For example, the IPCC acknowledge that 42% of their scenarios are unlikely. This information is deeply embedded within technical reports that policymakers are unlikely to scrutinise. And this emphasises the previous example about risk assessments. Also, the proposed problem and solution sets concerning net zero serve special interest and global corporate groups. In past times, polarised world or scientific views have been treated with exclusion, religious inquisitions, and the persecution of heretics. In modern times, we can perhaps choose wiser and more respectful approaches, such as professional facilitation, combined with properly structured scenario planning and rigorous strategic planning. In this manner, we may better integrate seemingly polarised worldviews into balanced policy and strategy making. Such an approach would constitute best practice, and it is not evident across the Southwest region. And this demonstrates gaps and failures in advisory, governance and organisational best practice. Concerning CO2, the IPCC informed position is contested by other independent organisations, such as the CO2 Coalition. They also warn against net zero policies of government and global corporate special interest groups being scientifically invalid and will lead to worldwide impoverishment and starvation. It may be wise to heed and pay attention to these warnings. On their website, they provide 32 facts, which include: CO2 is not a significant driver of warming or climate change. The present era is dangerously close to vegetation survival thresholds of CO2. We are, according to the CO2 Coalition, CO2 impoverished. The planet has greened considerably over the past 2 decades. More CO2 is a contributory factor on this. As CO2 is plant food, and levels of 832 parts per million show the level of enhanced plant growth. Modern warming began 300 years ago, in pre-industrial times. There is no proof or indications of runaway warming. In the UK, for example, the Romans grew grapes, indicating much warmer times. So what might a 70% reduction in CO2 without delay, as mandated by the council executives, look like? Illustrated by example 3, we asked about impact assessments and strategic planning processes. Indeed, studies had been commissioned by the councils about how to achieve the net zero targets, but nothing about the adverse impact and potential harms from the policies. No impact assessments, contingency and mitigation plans, no alternative options relating to the citizens and societal well-being. This indicates not only a significant oversight, but a whole layer of strategic process and strategy making missing. Again, this had not been identified and corrected by audit, advisory and governance. Clearly a major institutional blind spot. The best impact study about net zero policies is the Absolute Zero report published in 2019 by a collaboration of leading UK universities. It highlights by 2030, for example, the consumption of meat being reduced by 50%, only 3 new items of clothing per person per year, production of petrol and diesel vehicles end, and 3 airports remain in the UK. We are starting to see the impact of such policies, for example on farming, cost of living, energy prices, predicted food shortages, and expensive building regulations. Strategically, net zero is only one solution scenario, and its value is questionable when considering that Britain contributes to only 1% of global CO2 emissions. In contrast, China alone is increasing its 27% of global CO2 emissions each year. Independent experts warn that even if the UK and Western countries succeed in achieving net zero, the impacts on warming is negligible. So what possible benefits are there to subjecting the people, regional economy and society to the severe hardships and poverty from zero carbon policy? Treating such a frenzy of strategic urgency and seemingly polarised scientific worldviews in a more balanced and regionally sensitive manner may be achieved through scenario planning, where contrasting or even heretic views can be positively and beneficially integrated into regional planning effort. Adopting such an approach may better protect the interests of the citizens and better discern through the veneer of greenwashing propaganda that masks the real-life consequences and impacts to the citizens and regional well-being. Impacts that are largely being ignored. As Seven Concerned Citizens, we have suggested a regional reappraisal of the climate emergency and net zero policies, alongside a thorough reappraisal of the organisation systems and culture. We suggest the appointment of an independent inclusion advisor and facilitator, to commission a team of expert advisors holding opposing positions, to construct a full and thorough scenario planning exercise, and to commission thorough risk, value, impact and option assessments. These measures would constitute best practice and balance in strategy making. Again, what is most alarming is the failure of advisory, audit, governance and leadership after 5 years not to have identified and influenced such or a similar remedy. Clearly, the council organisation system is not designed and developed for the emergency planning purposes that it is undertaking. For the protection of the citizens and this region, this requires urgent rectification, underpinned by rigorous strategic review. So here are a few questions to ponder. How certain are you that we have a climate emergency that requires accelerated CO2 reduction measures? Have you been adequately advised, informed and consulted? Why are almost 2,000 independent experts and scientists strongly refuting climate emergencies and gravely warning the public against net zero policies of global corporate special interest groups and government corporate interests? With Britain contributing to less than 1% of CO2 emissions, what are the benefits to our citizens and society from the hardship and poverty now increasingly evident through the drive towards net zero? As councils and councillors, there is a duty of care to protect the citizens from threats of harm, particularly from poorly developed policy and strategy at the behest of the leading regional councils. You may wish to consider seeking assurance from planning and higher tier regional councils and their auditors that the issues raised in these notices are being addressed, rectified, and the organisations can demonstrate being fit for purpose without the threats of harm to citizens from their organisation and management systems. A heightened scrutiny regarding risk and value management, paying attention to corporation and privatisation threats against remaining public assets. and insist on rigorous and transparent strategic process, including best practice regional scenario planning, value management and inclusion of critical voices. So in order to avert a public crisis related to strategic planning, we urge you to please act upon and share this information. As concerned citizens, we are highlighting the need for enhanced scrutiny and integration of seemingly polarised scientific worldviews, strategic planning rigour that includes regionally focused scenario planning, thorough impact, risk and value management. On behalf of concerned citizens, thank you for your time and considerations.